Hello and welcome to Storytime with Mr. Ryan. We're gearing up to celebrate the birthday of Louis Armstrong, one of jazz's greats. Nicknamed Satchmo, Armstrong was born on August 4th, 1901, in a little back neighborhood in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana. Armstrong was passionate from a young age about his culture, about music, and about his horn. But he dealt with quite a bit of racism and oppression on his journey to stardom. That's why today we read Just a Lucky So-and-So, the story of Louis Armstrong, by Lesa Cline-Ransome, with illustrations by James Ransome. Let's hop on in. In New Orleans, Louisiana, in a part of town outside of Storyville, tucked in a corner called Back o' Town, in a section nicknamed the battlefield, little Louis Armstrong was born, black and poor and lucky. On the corner of Perdido and Liberty, little Louis lived in one room with no lights and no running water. But it was home to him and his sister, Mama Lucy, and his mama, Mayanne. The grandson of slaves, little Louis toted laundry, hauled coal, sold newspapers, and scavenged through garbage to earn money for him and his family. On the streets, little Louis sometimes made his own trouble. But it was nothing his mama's sharp tongue and a switch from the chinaberry tree in Grandma Josephine's yard couldn't fix. Every day, outside of his window, little Louis listened up and down the streets to the music of brass bands, funeral marches, honky-tonks on Saturday nights, church services on Sunday mornings. Across the street, he peeked through the cracks of Funky Butt Hall. On cornet, the sassy ragtime music of Bunk Johnson, Buddy Bolden, and Joe Oliver followed him wherever he went. Johnson had tone, Bolden blew hard, but for little Louis, it was King Oliver who could outperform any horn player in all of New Orleans. School learning at the Fisk School for Boys began for little Louis at 7. Before school and after, on the Karnofsky's wagon next to Morris, little Louis tooted a tin horn. "Penny for your rags?" and bleated, "Nickel for your scraps?" Through the window of a pawn shop, a cornet caught Louis's eye. A $5 loan from Morris bought the cornet for Louis. Some brass polish and oil brought the horn to life. Down Rampart Street, 4 boys harmonized My Brazilian Beauty. Little Mac on drums, Big Nose Sidney on bass, Redhead Happy Bolton as baritone, and the gravelly tenor of little Louis, the boy with a smile so wide, open kids called him Satchel Mouth. New Year's Eve in New Orleans was all music, fireworks, and midnight shots fired in celebration. Little Louis joined in with his stepfather's gun. All his scrapes with the law added up, and at 11 years old, little Louis was sent away. At the colored waif's home for boys, little Louis could barely eat. He missed his mama, his sister, and his cornet. Through his open windows drifted the call of the bugle, a bugle to rise, a bugle for chores, a bugle for bed. The band leader, Mr. Davis, told little Louis that boys from the battlefield don't belong in a band. Little Louis sang solos for everyone to hear. Mr. Davis listened and started Louis with the tambourine. Then he played the drums. Mr. Davis made him the bugler, and then he put him on cornet. Mr. Davis made him the band leader. The band traveled to play in every corner of New Orleans, uptown and downtown, West End, Spanish Fort, and front of town. But for little Louis, there was nothing like walking through his old neighborhood at the head of the band blowing "Home Sweet Home." Lining the streets was everyone he knew, and right up front was his mama, Mayanne. At 14, little Louis returned to Perdido Street, not so little. By then, he could make any song swing. Louis needed to hear a song just once, and it was his. He worked all day holing coal, and all night playing in honky-tonks around town. Louis met Joe as Joe paraded through town with the Onward brass band and followed him everywhere. Louis ran Joe's errands, carried his horn, but in the between times, Joe taught Louis note by note. In Joe's home, Louis filled up on rice and beans and music lessons. Louis traded in his first pawnshop cornet for Joe's used one. Louis listened to Joe's horn crow like a rooster, growl like a lion, cry like a newborn baby. 2 horns, side by side. So close, Louis called him Papa Joe. Aboard the SS Sydney, he blew swing, waltzes, and dance tunes all up and down the banks of the Mississippi River. On land, Louis blew with the Tuxedo Brass Band, and then Kid Ory's hottest jazz band in town, featuring Baby Dodds, Pops Foster, and his papa, Joe Oliver. After a time, New Orleans honky-tonks were too small for the king. Joe hopped a train and blew goodbye to New Orleans. Chicago was waiting. Louis stepped in where Joe stepped out. His horn had folks talking about the little boy from the battlefield. Night after night, Louis filled up the halls, filled up the streets, filled up his pockets with the music from his cornet. 4 years later, Joe sent a telegram. Louis was ready to leave. All aboard! Louis stood on the train platform, fish sandwich in one hand, cornet in the other. Worried he'd catch cold in the windy city, his mama made him wear long johns in the August heat. Joe Oliver and Chicago were waiting. On the south side of Chicago, at the corner of 31st and Cottage Grove, Louis peeked into Lincoln Gardens dance hall. A globe glittered from the ceiling. A balcony looked out over the dance floor. Joe and King Oliver's Creole jazz band warmed up. Louis's tuxedo was pressed and patched and small. He walked to the bandstand where Baby and Johnny Dodds, Will Hardin, Honore Dutray, and Bill Johnson waited. From the very first note, they knew. He played quietly behind Joe, softly in back of Joe, echoing after Joe. Someone yelled, "Let that youngster blow!" And Louis stepped forward and stood in front of Joe and blew. Louis stood in front of bands in Chicago, New York, California, and Europe, on records, in Hollywood, on Broadway, and on the radio. The little boy from New Orleans, Louisiana, from a part of town outside Storyville, in a corner called Back of Town, in a section nicknamed the Battlefield, was just a lucky so-and-so. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this wonderful little story time and this little biographical piece about Louis Armstrong. If you haven't heard his music, I strongly recommend checking it out, especially What a Wonderful World. It touches my heart every time. Well, I hope you enjoyed this story. I encourage you to check out some of the other stories on this channel, especially the Great Person series, if you like these biography books. And I also encourage you to check out veronalibrary.org/children. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time, I'll be seeing you. Bye-bye.